Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Leising, and this is my podcast, Decent People. Welcome back to the conversation. Today on the show, I spoke to Stephen Waterhouse, who is the co-founder of Orchid, which does many things, but one of the main things they do is they're providing a decentralized virtual private network to ensure privacy in the Web3 world. Stephen, his nickname is Seven, and we get into how that came about in the show. But we had a wide-ranging conversation about privacy and about why it's important to be vigilant about not giving away too much information as you're on the internet. He has a fascinating history. He was at Pantera from 2013 to 2016 when blockchain was really sort of taking off in its early days. We discussed what it was like back then. And we talked about, Orchid and what they're doing in terms of decentralized physical infrastructure networks and how, regulation is sort of affecting the global crypto development area and stage right now. So with all that, let's get to the episode, and I hope you guys like it. Thank you very much. Hey, Stephen, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for being here. I've been really looking forward to this. I can't wait to pick your brain about blockchain and Web3. You've had such an illustrious career and done many amazing things. But I do want to start. So I was doing my research on you, and you were, kind of introduced to me as Stephen Seven Waterhouse. And so But in my research, I never came across where the nickname came from. So I thought we might start there. Where did Seven come from?
It's very simply Stephen, no T. You just drop the T, so then you get to Seven.
I was thinking that might just be it, right?
It's actually that simple. I spell my name with a V, so it's literally Stephen, no T. Now, the origins of it was that when we started Orchid back in 2017, there was another co-founder. And at the time I went by Steve and he went by Steve, and quite quickly it got to this, very heated discussions and lots of debates and design work and so on. And I was just like, guys, it's getting really confusing with this whole Steve thing. Can someone just pick another name? And another one of our co-founders, Brian, said, you know what? I'm just going to drop one letter and you can be Seven. And it had this kind of funny sort of crypto kind of, ring to it. And so I was like, that's actually kind of cool. How about I just change all my handles? So I changed my email address, my handle, everything I could find, and then we got pretty well known during that year, and so I got to know a lot of people who introduced myself as Seven, and I was giving talks as Seven, and then before you know it, the people who knew me, that's what they called me.
There's a trope in journalism where when you're out reporting and you come across a dog, you always get the dog's name. So I feel that way about nicknames. I think they're always usually, hopefully there's a good backstory. And I was really hoping that this had nothing to do with the creepy David Fincher movie Seven. Did you see that?
No.
Oh man.
The other one's hiding out somewhere, but this is her first time on camera in the podcast.
She's beautiful.
We have two of these.
Is it a corgi?
No, it's a Shiba.
A Shiba. Oh yeah, of course.
Crypto means she just wanted to say hi. So yeah, we actually have two Shibas.
What was her name?
That one's Bella, and we have Naomi in the other end.
Well, my dog is upstairs because she makes too much noise for when I'm doing recordings, so she is banished.
Okay, but if you see me reach down, that's what I'm saying hi to the Shiba down here.
Yeah, I thought we might start with something that's a little not off topic, but Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, just said that they are investing $100 million in Eigenlayer. It's a Series B, and you guys have funding from A16Z. I just wondered, I wondered what your take is on that and Eigenlayer, and it seems like it's a really kind of potentially foundational shift in what Ethereum can do. And I was just curious what, if you've come across them or what you feel about that project and what it's adding to the sort of whole Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we did work with Mark and Chris at Andreessen back in the 2017 days, and I've stayed in touch even after moving out here. And I have some friends at Eigenlayer. I know the team pretty well. Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's this data availability concept. You have Celestia, and then you also have EigenLayer, and then you have like different approaches to how to architect these kind of different approaches to kind of segmenting how blockchains can be organized and designed. So I think that on the whole, this design aspect is an interesting one and a positive one. I think there are some challenges that have come up, and there's sometimes controversial conversation about restaking and restaking on top of restaking and ad infinitum.
Coming from the financial world, like the idea of leverage is, sometimes a scary thing. And I wondered if this restaking of what's already staked it strikes you as risky, or if you think it all can be handled.
Time will tell. To think that there are, in every kind of expansion phase of Web3, crypto, blockchain, pick your favorite name, there are components that are new components that are introduced that often initially can seem quite scary and hard to understand. I think restaking is still like not 100% understood yet as to the full impact of it and how far it could be extended.
For listeners, what this is you already stake now in proof of stake on Ethereum, right, to secure the network, but then restaking protocols can allow you to take that ETH and I guess use it to back another kind of protocol or the security of another layer. Is that a good way of saying it?
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, it's essentially recursively providing security by providing your collateral, which is the staked ETH in that case, to that network. And then there can be rewards on top of the existing staking that you've got. To the extent that there's a new stable coin from Ethena, backed by, I think it's Dragonfly and also Arthur Hayes and some people in that crew who are promising a 27% yield stablecoin. And they then go to great lengths to explain that it's not actually a stablecoin, it's more of a structured product. But it does have echoes of terror, and people are getting terrified by these ideas that suddenly we're barely out of the woods and we're offering these kind of products again. I think there are some significant differences there, but again, I think a lot of these things are poorly understood. And if sort of well-educated people in the space are finding some of these things challenging to understand, then you can be sure that sort of the average person who's just getting in, a kind of more like retail person, is told that they're going to have this kind of yield. They may not understand exactly what they're getting into and what the risks are. I think that's when things get dangerous in crypto.
Yeah, like you said, I can't believe that we're going to go through that cycle again so soon, and I hope we don't.
Well, it's always different each time around.
I guess so. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but yeah. Well, I'd like to go back into your life. I know you went to Cambridge, and that's where you got your engineering degrees. Did you grow up in England?
Yeah, I was born in the northeast of England, Newcastle. My parents are from Manchester. We moved to the southeast when I was young, when I was 8 years old, and then quite near Cambridge actually. And then from an early age, I just had this ambition to initially play rugby at Cambridge. So I was a big rugby player back then. And then that didn't work out so well, so I started rowing. So I rowed for the university and did lots of other sports. And then I did my degree there, stuck around for a master's degree in speech recognition and language processing, and then eventually did a PhD specializing in deep learning neural networks for speech recognition. And the architecture I picked was something that's being used today, which is called the Mixtures of Experts, which is used by Mixtral for their LLM.
What college were you in?
Initially Fitzwilliam, and then I switched to Jesus for my master's and PhD.
Yeah, my brother went there. He was in Darwin.
Oh, nice.
I loved that campus. It's so gorgeous, the CAM.
That's really pretty, yeah.
I have to ask, I'm a football fan, a Premier League fan. You said Newcastle, Manchester. Any teams, or were you a rugby guy?
I really wasn't much of a football fan, I have to say. I used to like watching England play, but I was always a bit too busy actually doing sports to be such a huge fan of things.
like most Americans, I played soccer till I was about 7 or 8 and then switched to other sports, but I've grown to love watching it as an adult. So I'm a Liverpool supporter, just in case anyone hasn't heard that before.
Oh, nice.
Did you gravitate easily towards engineering? Was that just something, did you always like figuring out how things work, or kind of getting in there and seeing, how systems are put together? What was it about engineering you think that attracted you?
I mean, I think there was a little bit of bias from my dad because he was an engineer. He was an electronic engineer before there were kind of electronic engineers. Like he worked on valves and transistors, and so there was a lot of inspiration there. And he was pretty hardcore in the sense that he would say, any other job isn't really a job. He was pretty dogmatic. But fortunately for him and for me, I actually really found the subject really interesting, and gravitated quite quickly towards it.
Did he ever take you to work, or did he explain what he was doing to you?
I mean, he was working on all sorts of crazy stuff. He was working on nuclear power plant control systems and big lots of radar technology and different things. And then ironically, he actually worked at GCHQ for a little while, which is the US spy technology company.
Okay.
Agency rather, which is ironic given some of the work I ended up doing.
Right. Kind of on the other end of the scale there, aren't you? My dad was he's an electrical engineer. He worked for JPL here in Los Angeles and worked on spacecrafts. And
the funny part of the GCHQ conversation would be when I would ask him about something, and then he'd ask me what year it was. I was like, whatever. And he's like, okay, yeah, I can talk about that now. Yeah. Because each of these things, I guess, had time periods where he was not supposed to talk about things. Yeah, so that's pretty funny. Yeah. He was very diligent about keeping going with them.
So another thing that impressed me about your resume was that you not only were aware of crypto and blockchain in 2013, but you were part of Pantera Capital with Dan Moorhead, where you guys were actively investing at that stage. Were you right there kind of when Bitcoin came out and the white paper and everything? Was that something that just came across your radar immediately?
Well, that was back in 2008. No, I actually completely missed it back then. I didn't, some people like to pretend they knew about it. I didn't. I think I'd read a Wired article or heard something here and there. I was focusing on different technologies. I'd been involved in many things. So after AI, I moved into kind of it was a .com, so everyone was doing a .com of some kind. But then after that, in the early 2000s, I started working on distributed systems, first with Nutella, and then, which is file sharing technology. We built, some friends, I joined a company which was building a distributed search engine, and we sold that to Sun Microsystems. And then at Sun, I built a distributed storage system. And then a few years later, I started getting into intellectual property. So then I worked on a company which we took public in 2011 that was fighting patent trolls by working actively in that market. And so through 2008 to 2012, I was busy building a startup and taking it public. And so it wasn't until 2012 I was part of a small venture fund, again focusing on IP, that we merged into Fortress Investment Group. Mm-hmm. And then I met Dan Moorhead, actually later met Dan, but initially met Pete Brigger and Mike Novogratz, and I got very interested in the idea of building some kind of investment product around Bitcoin. My interest was very much on the venture side of things. Pete and Dan were friends from college, and so Pete brought Dan in. And then over the summer, we were sort of continuing to work on this as a Fortress project. And then in September, a couple of things happened. One, the Silk Road got hit by the FBI, and so suddenly this thing that was already pretty sketchy was even more sketchy. So Fortress naturally decided this wasn't a project for them, but they did invest in Pantera, and Dan spun it out, and I joined as a partner and worked with him for about 3.5 years until mid-2016. decided I wanted to have another crack at the startup world after investing for a few years. And then it was later that I started my next phase of my career.
Well, it's interesting that you say you were working on distributed systems, but prior to kind of finding blockchain, was that something that really appealed to you right off the bat? Was the distributed nature of like the Bitcoin blockchain?
So some of the things that were happening in early 2000s may sound familiar. Like we had people working on peer-to-peer computing, like distributed computing across a wide area network, right? So there's things like Popular Power, there was distributed search, which we were working on. Obviously, there was file sharing. That was a big part of things. Sure. And the file sharing, the challenge was always like, for various reasons, most of which were copyright violation reasons, the challenge was like, how do you build something which you can't shut down? But inherent in a lot of these systems was issues around kind of verifiability. How do you prove things? The lack of any kind of real currency in the system, other than creating something. And there were attempts at this, like DigiCash and right. The ideas of Hashcash. And I knew these systems from just being around them for many years. Like I stayed plugged into what was happening. And then when I saw Bitcoin, I was like, oh, wow, this is cool. They actually like figured out so many things that were unsolved problems and merged a lot of different ideas together, and obviously came up with many, many new ideas. So that was my first thought. I was like, oh, it's like peer-to-peer and it works. This could be really interesting. And I immediately started thinking through all the different ideas and applications that had been kicking around for many years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure a lot of people realize, but like you said, most of what Bitcoin did was just kind of, or Satoshi, whoever, they brought existing things together in a way that hadn't been done before, and then it worked. Yeah,
it's a very elegant synthesis of other ideas. And proof of work had been something that had been proposed in different domains, but not in that specific way.
Yeah, was it Dvorak? There was a woman who had, I think, helped pioneer proof of work, and I think some proposals were using it to try to get rid of email spam.
Exactly.
I would love to hear more about what that time was like in the Bitcoin world and in blockchain. I think you were probably pretty heavy into like, so people were, Bitcoin was successful, it was working, it was starting to get, more recognition. But there were people, like I write about this in my book, like they were kind of like kicking the tires, I think is the way I put it, on Bitcoin to see if it could do more. Probably most prominently, Vitalik Buterin was doing that. But were you, so there were projects like Colored Coins where they were trying to, add things to the Bitcoin blockchain. Yeah. So what was that like from your side of the fence and looking at it as an investor? And did you, I guess I'd love to hear if you saw Ethereum coming, or, if you thought this is just the beginning, or what your thinking was like back then.
It's a funny story and a bit of a sad story around that one. And I'm looking forward to being quoted on this sometime, but no one's really taken the bait yet. But I famously missed Ethereum, and not just once, but a couple of times. And I say that because I really hope I learned my lesson on this one, which is that it's really easy to get too focused on one part of, or kind of like one narrative, right? And the narrative we had very early on in Pantera was that Bitcoin was going to win. And
that was it, right? Yeah.
But there wasn't really anything else. Like everything else was like a weird, like very bad copy of Bitcoin. You had like, Litecoin.
Mastercoin or whatever.
Sure, there was Mastercoin, and that was interesting. And then there was Colored Coin, and that was interesting. We had these various different attempts at these things. And there were so many attempts that after a while you were just kind of like, none of these seem like they're going to work. And we're looking for this like really great team that's going to come along. And with the Ethereum team, I unfortunately didn't get to meet enough of the team to really kind of get a sense, or the right people in the team to get a sense of like what was going to happen there.
Who did you run across? Do you remember?
Well, I didn't get a chance. I mean, I'd known Vitalik from the early days, but didn't get a chance to chat to him as he was moving it out. Ethereum was like, it was very hard, even after the launch had happened, to sort of see whether it was really going to work or whether something else was going to take its place. It's easy to look back in hindsight and say, oh my God, how could you miss that? You were there at the right time. And it's also I feel like it's brave to admit when you miss something, because you have to learn the lessons from those things. But then there was sort of a turning point for me when ERC20 tokens started. Then I was like, okay, now I get it. I can see you can do really interesting things now. Up until that point, I was kind of like, I don't know, like, what are we doing here? This isn't really a computer. Mm-hmm. It's not a world computer. It's just this thing, like it's just producing blocks. ERC20s came along, and then a lot of people were very skeptical, but I remembered that I'd been skeptical about Ethereum, and I was not skeptical at all. I jumped straight in and tried to understand it as much as I could and get deep into it.
I remember that whole kind of paradigm made a lot of sense to me with an ERC, where you could have a coin that a developer team created that was needed for their protocol, and that's how they could kind of monetize, right? Because if that coin was in demand, it would go up in value, and there now, because it's interesting too, like the economics of the blockchain system is very tricky. I think that's one thing that Vitalik has always really is deep into, is like the crypto economics of the whole thing, because just from a outsider point of view, it's like, where do you monetize this thing? And so I noticed with Orchid, you guys have your own coin, and I was curious if that was sort of, and you need it for the protocol. Is that the mod? Like, did you kind of take that model from the ERC20, kind of days and implement it with Orchid?
Yeah, we did. And initially OXT which is our coin, was required both for staking, as part of the smart contracts that we use to enable providers to come onto the network, and then also for payment, in order to be able to pay for the resources in the distributed network. So Orchid is this network of distributed resources of providers, and you can pay for access to them. There are a couple of different examples of this, and more that we're working on. The first example we worked on was VPNs, essentially like being able to send traffic, have it encrypted, have it wrapped if necessary, and sent to another provider, so you can have these multiple hops in a similar way to onion routing networks. And then providers receive payment. Now, over time, we realized that being able to pay in any currency was actually more interesting. And so then we extended this and said, okay, you can pay in any currency you want, and providers can receive those currency. But for the economics of the network, it made more sense to keep OXT as the sort of staking currency of the system. And so that's the case still. It's like we came at Orchid during the ICO period, or around that time, sort of as the ERC20s got going. And that was an interesting fundraising model, in the sense that Ethereum did arguably the sort of first, I think maybe Mastercoin did the first one, but Ethereum went on and did the most well-known of these crowdfunding things. And then the mechanism there, which is interesting, is that you could sort of disintermediate a lot of this standard funding mechanisms. We didn't do an ICO. We did a private round, did a couple of private rounds, and then launched after, I think it was about like 2.5 years in the end of 2019.
Yeah, it's one of those fascinating things I think about crypto, is that it just helped reimagine these traditional functions of finance, but in a crypto way. Like obviously raising capital is one of the most, it's a foundation of everything. And here now you've got a crowdsourced way with a coin offering. And so you got into this a little bit, but so Orchid it's a decentralized virtual private network. Talk to me about why the decentralized part of that is important, and where you see that fitting in these days, because I'd like to get into kind of a bigger conversation about privacy and about, how governments are trying, maybe co-opting some of the crypto, innovations, CBDCs and other things. So, but I would love to start with like, why is decentralizing the VPN so important?
What's interesting about that is that we really saw, from the very beginning, we saw the potential for Orchid and the design that we had to do many different kinds of services. But I have a theory on building platforms, which is that you need to build something first. You need to like actually have one application before you extend it out to a service. And so it was a bit of a pipe dream as to one day we'd actually add other things. And recently we've started to add some designs around storage, and the team's actually working on some other areas around compute. So on a more general level, why is it interesting to decentralize network services? Well, we can go back to the earliest days and do a history lesson around TCP/IP and mail and other services, which were originally designed very much as decentralized architectures. But that won't take a while. But that is the origins of the internet. Is very much a decentralized design, originally designed to withstand major catastrophes like a nuclear attack. It's only in the period, kind of like, I guess, like this is the client server period, if you like, of the mega servers and the clouds, that we entered this era where everything has become more and more centralized, really at the higher levels of the stack and the web stack and data parts of it and compute parts of it and just all these different areas. So when you look at the issues around centralization, you're really running into these ideas of who's controlling the compute, who's controlling the network, who's controlling the storage, and the sort of the new area. One of the areas I've been looking very closely at, both at Orchid and in my investing work, is this idea of around decentralizing AI. And so kind of some of the challenges we have right now around the very strong power that's being gained by companies like OpenAI or Google or Microsoft.
Right.
And so I think that on a more philosophical level, I'm very aligned to the idea of decentralization and why that's important for privacy, censorship, and just our ability to sort of build the things and use the things that we want to do in the future.
And that is, getting around or creating an alternative to those centralized points is almost like one of the foundations of crypto. Yet, as you described, a lot of Ethereum, for example, is centralized in terms of like it's running on Amazon Cloud, right? So it almost kind of defeats the purpose. And I was wondering, just looking at kind of where we are today, if we're losing the battle here to maintain that decentralization and to maintain a system that is resilient to those kinds of challenges.
You do end up with these situations where you end up with strong economic drivers that push you towards centralization. And I think that there's a continuous kind of push and pull between centralization and decentralization. As we design these systems out, we're hopefully making better decisions that get us to a more decentralized architecture.
Yeah, I saw a tweet that you liked or you agreed with. It was Jonathan Wu on Twitter. He said, it was a longer tweet than this, but this was the last line. He says, "Crypto is sleepwalking into becoming one of the most brilliant surveillance tools ever invented." And he's kind of getting at this idea that there is too much centralization, that central bank digital currencies would enable the surveillance of entire populations in terms of where you're spending your money. And so, I mean, that's something that I'm really, I don't know, concerned is the right word, but it is something that I think it needs to be, we have to be vigilant about. And like when OFAC came against Tornado Cash, I thought that was quite a watershed moment where all of a sudden they're sanctioning lines of code. And so I guess that's sort of like underpinning my question to you about if we're losing the battle. I don't mean to make it maybe so dramatic, but are you optimistic about how, like, are the good guys out there too? Like, I know that there are people that are trying to co-opt this and use it for their own means, but do you think the industry is up to kind of withstanding that?
That's a great question. Certainly the long arm of US regulations or European regulations, now we have some regulations in Europe too, can put people off, in terms of can put people off wanting to develop code that would enable different levels of privacy. Certainly, Tornado Cash is a good example. There are studies around how ineffective KYC ML really is at preventing bad actors. And yet we continue to roll it out and enforce it and make it more and more difficult for people to onboard into banks, crypto exchanges, and then potentially, in the future, you might have to KYC AML your wallet. And then, of course, with the effectively chain of custody that the blockchain enables, it's possible to end up tracing electronic money globally. So yeah, I think it's very challenging. Rather than getting sad, I've tried to. I do get sad, but I've tried to vote with my feet, vote with the work I do, and vote with my investments. I was an early investor in Zcash. I think we were the first. Pantera was the first institutional investor back before it launched. I invested in MobileCoin a couple of years ago, which is going after another approach on Signal. And I was a very early investor in Risk Zero. I was building ZK proofs, which these things systems could revolutionize the way privacy works. It's a constant sort of balancing act as well, which is difficult in the sense that there are very sort of compelling emotional arguments against privacy and against the kind of things that we should be concerned about and we should be thinking about building.
Does it come down to convenience? Are people willing to trade convenience for a lack of privacy, do you think, in a lot of cases?
Yeah, of course. But we can also build applications that have these things as a default. And Apple's rolling out quantum-resistant encryption soon. Mm-hmm. So there are some people really trying, independent of working crypto or otherwise. A lot of these things, the way we tend to think a lot of issues around privacy is what's the attack model? Who's the threat? Who are you trying to hide or be private from? When you end up in the level of a state actor, you have very little chance of being private from that person.
Yeah.
But hopefully that's not everybody. And maybe that's. But at the same time, as Snowden says, you shouldn't have to be thinking about what you have to hide. That's the wrong question.
Yeah, it's kind of the fallacy of I'm not doing anything wrong. Why should I worry about people knowing what I'm doing? Which is, a very slippery slope.
Yeah, and people use, you get politicians throwing information around which isn't necessarily accurate. The Wall Street Journal ran a thing about funding of Hamas, and
I've got Elizabeth Warren here on the list here of things to talk to you about.
Exactly. So came for one of her tweets. It's you have to be careful to try and step outside of the political agenda and think bigger and think, what if the administration is, if I'm really against the administration, and anybody who's of a reasonable mind today would be too, whichever side of the house or kind of how you think about it, you just end up with a really bad person in charge of the country. And then they've got these tools at their disposal. Right. What do you do then? Mm-hmm. And you don't have to go far to pick your jurisdiction to see this in action today. And so again, this is without having a political commentary on what's right or wrong or who's doing the right thing or the wrong thing. It's just these are fundamental systems. My friend runs the Human Rights Foundation, and they focus on very simple, just trying to rid the world of dictators. Mm-hmm. Just that mission. And that leads to so many basic things which you have to focus on, including encryption and privacy, communication.
Yeah. I was talking to Paul Brody the other day. He's the blockchain lead at Ernst & Young. And he was saying that a lot of the clients that they're dealing with are building projects now to launch on like the public and main Ethereum net, but that they're incorporating zero knowledge proofs into that to maintain privacy of their transactions, or they just don't want the public nature of the blockchain to get in the way. And I was curious if you think, are zero knowledge proofs getting to the point where you think that could be a solution to help people mask or just have privacy sort of built in from the beginning?
They've certainly made rapid advancements, and like I said, I'll plug my friends at Risk Zero, who do a lot of work on building very scalable provers. And then there are other people now who've rolled out other efficient systems. It's a long way from where we were a few years ago, and I think that it's really very promising. And we're not at the stage yet that sort of any general purpose smart contract can be encoded that way, but we're getting to the point where we're able to build specialized applications which cover a lot of the use cases that we want. And I think it's a very hopeful area for this work. And it's interesting is that it's scalability that drove that. So it's actually like an economic driver, because it's hard to motivate privacy. It's a bit like security. Like, why would I go spend money on antivirus software? It's like, well, until something really bad happens, then you don't think about it. But privacy is even worse. But the fact that it was motivated by scalability, and now people are looking at, as they look, again, it's business applications. It's not so much individual transactions. It's business applications saying, I want to use this big network. I don't want to have to build my own one, but I want to keep things private. And like big banks don't want all the transactions exposed. There's many reasons that are outside of like doing, super shady secret coder kind of nefarious things that are not. They have the right to be private. Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of great reasons to be private, and so with Orchid, and I read you wrote back at the end of 2020 that you with the pandemic you felt that people were going to sort of realize how much of their lives are exposed on the internet, and how that lack of privacy can be troubling. I think you're spot on about that. And I'm just curious, a couple of years later, how do you feel? Was that a wake-up call for folks, do you think? Or do you think there's more to be done? Or how are you thinking about that now? And what are you guys doing at Orchid to try to help that, for people who want that protection? So the pandemic was interesting. I remember KYCing into a clothing store in order to go there. So it was in Berlin, and we had to scan the QR code that represented our sort of travel status, our COVID vaccine status, and all these things, and basically register in order to go in. Jeez. And this is a new level, and what was interesting about that period was how fast people were willing to just give things up, right? We have GDPR in Europe, and everyone's like, yeah, we got GDPR, great, we can stop having cookies, and we can choose the cookies we don't want, they're not going to track us. But meanwhile, we're like, KYC to go to the cinema. I mean, Apple had that app on the phone, right, where they were tracking you to let you know in case you were near someone who was maybe positive for COVID. Yeah, right. So the lesson there, I think, was this. Obviously, it was extremely tragic, for what happened during that period, and it was so difficult for people. But the lesson around user behavior and how quickly people will just say, this doesn't matter. I'm willing to sacrifice my privacy and hand it over to governments, corporations, administrations, in return for safety or perceived safety. It was really fascinating, right? It was like interesting how quickly people were willing to do that. I think that in many ways the stakes have got higher recently with systems in AI, and just also So like I was writing this thing actually just before we kind of think I was about to tweet something. We worried a lot about Instagram and Facebook. We had movies about it. Everyone talked about it. It's like own your own data, like all these things. And then people ran these experiments. They're like, okay, what if I actually have something where I compensate people for their data? And then turns out that your data is actually not worth that much. It's really like on a monthly basis, it's really not that big a deal. Maybe you could buy some coffee with it, but it's and Instagram and Facebook came under so much fire for what their practices and so on, and everybody wanted to opt out of these cookies here and there and everything. And I certainly like to have the ability to say where I'm being tracked and where I'm not being tracked. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I kind of like personalized ads. Mm-hmm. I think it's cool. Like I like the ads I got on Instagram, and I'm okay. I'm feeding an AI, right? It's like I'm sitting there. Instagram's a big AI. It's like I'm just feeding it. Hey, like I like this, I don't like this. I like this, I don't like this. But what I'm not going to do is get the last 10 years of my email correspondence and give it to Instagram. Because I'm like, well, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to give me a slightly better ad? I don't really, I'm not that interested. Yeah. But I would do that to ChatGPT or something like it that I trusted. Because once you start using those systems, it's so compelling and so addictive that you're willing to forget things. You're just like, it's like, yeah, it's like, I'm just going to give up my privacy because this is amazing. And so when I talk about decentralized systems, or we're going back from the beginning, like I'm saying the stakes have got higher, I think it's even more important that we decentralize. And probably like, it may be the time where we have the ability to explain what we're talking about because people can use it so easily and they kind of get it. And we haven't had some big abuse that we should be worried about yet, or we hopefully haven't. But you can kind of imagine how powerful agents and LLMs are going to be once they have that data about you. So that would ideally be in the hands of people who you can trust, or decentralized mechanisms, or something where you can be sure you've got privacy. And there's a whole thread of things that go down there. So that's the way I've been explaining it recently, is just because people get that, it's the latest narrative, people get it. It's a very powerful thing.
And speaking of that trust, are you speaking about the source of where you're pulling information from for an AI model is important, right? It's like kind of everything. And so if you could use blockchain technology to have a data set that was verified and was authentic, that's a much better pool of data to be using for an AI model than just, I don't know, random stuff that you can find on the internet that might be completely wrong or misinformation. It seems like that's an early way that blockchain and AI could kind of be symbiotic.
Yeah, sure. There's verifying models, there's verifying data, and then there's aspects around decentralized compute, whether it's for training, which is a different challenge, or whether it's for inference. There's a sort of like permissionless compute on the inference side, which Project Morpheus is working on the open source side, and there's a number of startups in this area. So it's definitely a burgeoning area of discovery, and a small amount of investment is now going into this area, and certainly a lot of excitement and hype around things. So it's going to be interesting couple of years in that space. And I think having this sort of perspective around it, something that myself have been looking at, some of my team, is like around the idea of there's a new phrase, like this DePIN thing. It's like decentralized physical infrastructure, and it's really reframing a lot of things that are not DeFi or not NFTs, or kind of not what we've been used to.
It's just what we need to another acronym.
Yeah, that's right, another one. And so I was going to call it, someone's like, oh, so what's a DePIN? They're like, so what's a DRN? I was like, well, that's another thing. I guess it's distributed resource network. So someone had another acronym I didn't know.
Is that digital rights management, DRM?
No, it's like DRN. It's like a distributed resource network. But you end up with, and it's good. It's good to get people thinking about things and aligning around a concept and people to understand them.
Well, yeah. So what are you guys at Orchid? What are you doing in that way? I know you're working on some DePIN projects, but then going back, the decentralized VP, virtual private network is, that's sort of foundational to you guys, but this seems to be informing pretty much everything that you're trying to create.
Yeah, so working on some ideas in Orchid. We've been doing some experiments in storage, and we announced we wrote a research paper on a new kind of coding called twin coding. So it's not new. We found it in the deep past. Kind of found like some new applications for it. But we innovated around some ideas there, and also some economic design ideas, which I think is interesting. We're now working with the community to build those things out. So a little bit of a different approach to us. We started off back in the day of like building a network ourselves and then slowly rolling it out to open source. This time around, we're starting from an open source perspective and welcoming people into the fold there. We have also been working on some areas in AI and looking at ways to do sort of decentralized inference and use the payment mechanism and the directory mechanism we have in Orchid to support that. Again, there would be we can wrap that into the VPN network and add privacy in there, so you wouldn't know which IP address was necessarily asking for a certain prompt. You may give away other aspects of your privacy by just telling it what you're doing. So we can't help you there, but we could shield different aspects of it, and at least it would be a decentralized approach. On a personal level, I've rolled together a bunch of kind of angel deals I've done over the last couple of years, and I'm spinning up a new fund that's going to be focusing on the intersection of Web3 and AI and both areas in that sense. So that's going to be a new project for me going forwards in tandem with my work at Orchid.
I was reading up on Orchid, and one thing that kind of jumped out at me was that you allow for micropayments, right, using crypto. And so can you explain a little bit about that? Because I think people might understand it in a compared to like a subscription model where you pay up front, but here I think you guys are doing a different approach.
Yeah, so you can layer other payment designs on top of any kind of micropayment architecture. So you could add a subscription model too, but the trick is thinking about the payments and the services on the lowest level. So when you're building these networks, which are providing services to people, one of the challenges is trust. So blockchains solve a lot of trust issues, but they don't necessarily solve this one. And this trust issue is, if you're providing service, I'm supposed to pay you, but if I pay you up front, you may not give me the service, or you may be giving something fake. But if I agree to pay you at the end, I may just walk away after taking what you gave me. And so there isn't really a solution around this, except to make the interval of payment and service small enough that you're like, it's okay. If you gave me stuff I don't like, I'll ask someone else. There's a network out there, I'll go ask them. So that ends up being to the point where you kind of want to reduce the payment levels to the packet level, which is what we do at Orchid. So we make a packet very small, and we say, let's just make this payment. Now, you can't get that to work on we certainly couldn't get it to work on Ethereum when we built it, and L2s don't do it. Even the other fast blockchains, they don't do it either. We need things at the packet level, like very, very small, very, very fast. And so what we did was say, well, as long as there's enough systems in the network, as long as enough people using this thing, as long as there's enough packets, you don't actually need to get actually paid. We can give you a ticket instead, and that ticket is like a lottery ticket. And so you can, as a provider, you can accumulate enough of these little lottery tickets that then you can say, I'm going to cash these in and win a prize. And that prize is effectively the expected value of what you would have been paid otherwise. So this, what we call probabilistic payments architecture, enables us to get those payments down very, very small and very, very fast.
Reminds me of like in a layer 2 where you're doing a lot of things off chain, but then you come back.
It's kind of like a roll-up, or probabilistic roll-up is another way to think about it.
At Orchid, you're aiming directly at developers, right? You're saying to them, here are some tools you can use to make your protocol better or your app better or whatever it is. And I guess I was wondering, is that working out for you guys, or are you also trying to target maybe, I don't know, bigger organizations or foundations or things where it could, Is that really where you think like the most good could be done is by giving developers these tools that might not be out there right now?
Yeah, so we come at it from a few different directions. We built a consumer-facing app on the Orchid app, and it's in iOS, it's in Android. I mean, it's like we went through that work of doing all the sort of App Store things, which is not nothing. That app even has in-app payments, so you can pay directly with your phone, which there's a whole other architecture as to how that works and why it's still private and decentralized in different ways. It's layered decentralization, But the app itself is really designed to provide a use case that shows people how you could use the rest of the technology. And increasingly, especially with the storage initiative, we're focusing on providing tooling and frameworks for people to use the network and build out these things. So we welcome people to come talk to us about applications they want to build with nanopayments, applications that they want to build using storage or VPN, and as I said, we're working on some compute components as well.
And I guess just lastly, having been around for a while and seen a lot of things, we touched on regulation. It feels to me like maybe it's certainly an overhang. I think it's getting better. I think the courts in the U.S. are providing some sanity into how regulators are approaching crypto. Just in general, what are you optimistic about where things are headed, or how are you feeling? Just with everything that's going on. I know you mentioned before we were on that you split your time between Switzerland and Portugal, but how important, I guess, is the U.S. in this regard in terms of like what the regulatory sort of vibe is coming out of Washington, D.C.?
It's tempting to hope and to think that these systems are so global and decentralized that you can kind of ignore one jurisdiction, or like the jurisdictions that controls the reserve currency of the world, as in the US dollar.
That's a good way of putting it.
I mean, right? So they have a big say over what happens with finance globally. They have like more impact, I think, than people realize. So it's been unfortunate, and I've been tracking this since the early days of when we got involved in 2013. It's been unfortunate that it's been so unclear as to what the rules were and what the rules were not. And I think certainly more recently, over the last few years, the SEC seems to have engaged in a sort of more punitive approach to enforcement. And I'm not alone. There are like, obviously, even within the SEC themselves, there are commissioners that disagree with different directions. And it is a commission. It's also important to remember that. On the other hand, it's and this is a bit more controversial point of view, but on the other hand, a lack of certainty may have helped us in some ways, and may actually still help us. If you look at MICA, on the other hand, in Europe, which a lot of people are excited about, like, yeah, there's some clarity and so on, but there were some rules in there which, certainly around like self-custody wallets, that could end up being far too restrictive. The other thing that perhaps passed recently in Europe was a AI bill, which talked about kind of like things like number of parameters in a network and a number of compute nodes in a network. And the problem with these rules is that they become laws, and yet they're immediately outdated.
Yeah, you can't really legislate technology.
Yeah,
right?
I think that one of the things that's a bit controversial in the sense is that the SEC says things like, we already have the rules for how to apply what's a security and what's not a security. But the problem is then, even though they do have these frameworks, they probably need some adaptation, and they also probably need some mechanism, I think Hester Pierce has been talking about this, with a sort of safe harbor idea, or some understanding as to what it means to become, as Heyman talked about, sufficiently decentralized and so on. So there's just a lot of narrative back and forth that confuses people. It confuses investors, it confuses developers. And the danger can be, specifically for the US, but also globally, that you end up with so much uncertainty that developers and investors decide that they'll go do something else that's less uncertain. And I've heard people say that, in the last few years. It's just been like, this is just getting crazy. We've got to do something else.
I might not have heard that as much as just like we're leaving the U.S. Like we're going somewhere else to continue our work.
But on the other hand, you have like your example with Tornado Cash and other systems, which were there's a long arm, right?
Yeah,
it's a very long arm of the law, and that kind of situation, we don't know all the things that happened there, because it sort of seems a very confusing case, but it's certainly put a chill down the spine of many people who are trying to work on similar ideas.
Right.
Other systems were recently shut down that were trying to do other privacy solutions.
I mean, I've definitely heard that argument that Gary Gensler has made, that they feel like they have the tools. He says that, but then you have to think, well, what if my counterparty is a smart contract? Like, how does that? Do you have rules for that? Like, and clearly they don't. And so I feel like that's just, I feel like they're very terrified of opening up this to Congress to make these rules, because, there's a lot of people that might want to take some power away from the SEC or the CFTC, or kind of combine the two agencies. And there's a lot of turf war stuff that goes back many years.
Sure, absolutely.
That's where the politics comes in.
The quick way to understand for people who may not see why the government comes for us so hard is we're building technology applications, we're investing in them, that's trying to decentralize centralized structures of power and control.
Yeah.
And we're doing it in finance, we're doing it in investment, we're doing it in applications, we're doing it in enterprise systems. And so anyone whose job is to administer, as in government, is going to be threatened by that. And so it's a very simple, logical architecture as to why people don't like us. It's not because we're bad people. It's not because we're doing bad things. It's just like, we're here to try and decentralize things, and people don't like that. Who are in the business of centralizing.
Yeah, trying to create an alternative, or to create something where you're no longer necessary.
Other governments like Switzerland that are actually more of a decentralized design, where there's more direct bureaucracy. They don't even have a president on a permanent basis. They vote. It's a rotating president through the commission that runs Switzerland at any point in time. And they have Kurtevele, they have Zug, they have Zurich, they have much more innovative solutions, and they have a full framework for how to treat tokens. And it's okay. It's a framework. You have to go buy it, but you figure it out. So I think a lot of it is cultural.
For sure. Well, Seven, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights and history with me.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great.
Tell people how they can find out more about you. You mentioned the Orchid app is out there in the App Store and the Android store. So everybody go out and get that, and then tell people how they can learn more about Orchid and about what you're doing.
The website is very simply orchid.com. That's ORCHID.com. We've got links to our Twitter and to our Discord there. If you find the Orchid Twitter, you'll find me, and you can follow me from that point on.
Well, again, thank you, Seven. It's been a pleasure, and please give my regards to Bella, and good luck with everything you guys are doing. You're fighting the good fight.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us, and make sure to subscribe and rate us at Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Decent People is a production of Decential Media. It is produced by Curtis Fritsch, with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Ives.